On today's show, we're going to be doing a mock draft. Two important points here. These guys will be picking based on what they think a team will do, not what they should do. Second, we know there will be trades Thursday night, but for this exercise, no trades. We're trying to keep it simple, straightforward, and go like that. The 2024 Established and Run mock draft is officially underway. Picking first for the Chicago Bears will be Scott Smith. Of course, they got this pick from the Panthers in last year's Bryce Young trade. Scott Smith, you're on the clock for the Bears.
Look, we don't need to take much time with this. It's Caleb Williams. It has been and always will be. I don't think anything's going to change. I don't think you're going to see any gas mask bong hits that'll adjust what Chicago decides to do, a la Laramie Tunsil in years past. So Caleb Williams, quarterback, USC, #1 to Chicago.
Yes. In embarrassing fashion, the CEO of Established the Run has actually laid $5,000 to win 100 on Caleb Williams to be the #1 overall pick. So if you want the 100, that kind of stuff is indeed out there. I will say on Caleb Williams that he's entering a situation that I think is unlike most #1 overall picks get. Like the Bears have stuff around him to support him, for him to hit the ground running. We'll talk more about that after the draft. Picking second for the Washington Commanders is Mr. Evan Silva. Evan, you're on the clock.
I'm still buying the narrative that Jaden Daniels doesn't want to play for Washington. And I felt like today, and we're recording this Monday afternoon, I felt like this morning there was another push for Jaden Daniels to be the second overall pick. And I'm sticking to my guns here. And it comes down to Drake May or JJ McCarthy. In this particular mock, I'm going to go with the curveball pick, JJ McCarthy at #2. There was, I don't know about a report, but speculation from John Keim, Standig's colleague covering the Washington football team for a very long time. He suggested that JJ McCarthy is actually higher on Washington's board than Drake May. So if we're coming down to that and we're trusting John Keim, which I don't have a problem doing in this particular mock, we're going JJ McCarthy, Adam Peters' first pick as the leader of the Washington football franchise.
There has been plenty of steam here. This was 20-1, 25-1. I saw it got down as low as 8, 9-1 for McCarthy to go second here. I'd be remiss if we didn't ask the Athletic Commanders reporter, Ben Standig, what he thinks about McCarthy to the Commanders and any other Commander thoughts before we move on in this mock.
Yeah, well, in terms of McCarthy, so because we went through this whole coaching search, a couple months ago that was very odd and chaotic in the sense that it may not have been odd and chaotic internally, but outside because the team wasn't talking and whatever information was out there or rumor was out there about Ben Johnson just led to massive speculation that it was Ben Johnson. And I kept saying, I'm not really hearing this. I'm not telling you that it isn't. I'm just saying I'm not hearing it to the degree that people are acting about it. So to that end, fast forward to now, I'm the same way with Jaden Daniels. Like I've had Jaden Daniels as my pick in the various mock drafts and other iterations since early March. And I think there's still validity to it. And if I was sitting in Evan's seat, I would have put Daniels down. But I haven't ruled out May or McCarthy yet. And in terms of McCarthy specifically, one thing that's interesting about these quarterbacks is that I can justify some level of connecting in Washington pretty easily. And in McCarthy's case, it's sort of, I've heard people say if Kyle Shanahan was like wanting a quarterback, like McCarthy would be a really good fit for what Shanahan wants to do, throws over the middle, throws on time, etc. Well, obviously Adam Peters just spent the new GM for the Commanders, spent the last 7 years with Shanahan, and Shanahan was Dan Quinn's OC in Atlanta. So it wouldn't stun me if they did land on that. I can't tell you for sure that I've heard what their order is, but I'm not going to be surprised by any of these three, which is partly why I can't wait for this draft to get here already.
Very, very interesting for sure. I'll say this. The Commanders have done an excellent job keeping this under wraps. I mean, no one knows because if someone knew, that line would be out to like minus 5,000 by now. Instead, it's been hovering around 200, 500, 300, even money this whole time. Okay. Don't want to get bogged down. Picking third, the New England Patriots, Ben Standig is on the clock. They now have their choice of a bunch of different quarterbacks after JJ McCarthy went second to the Commanders.
Well,
Go
when
ahead,
you
Ben.
guys told me I was picking third, I'm like, cool, I don't really have to think much. And now Evan's made me think. Boy, I'm a little torn here. Because I've been thinking Drake May this whole time on the assumption that Daniels goes 2. So I'll stay with that. Drake May going to the Patriots at 3. I mean, obviously the prototype quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised if McCarthy is viewed by either of these teams over May, but in general, May is viewed as the third guy. So I'll sort of stay with that here.
The slide for Jaden Daniels begins now. If this was a real mock, if this was a real draft, Mr. Daigle, I assume Arizona's phone would be blowing up out of control right now. However, we are not doing trades. So, Daigle, you are on the clock here for the Arizona.
I almost feel like we should make an exception here.
Okay, let's make an
and allow
exception.
for a trade. You want to do that? I mean, because we don't want to have this get out of control and Jaden Daniels like slips to number 11 or something like that.
That's fair.
You just one exception, one trade. How about that?
Okay, your honorable commissioner, Roger Goodell, will allow one trade, Daigle, if you'd like to make it. Go ahead and swap a team in. We don't have to worry about the compensation. Go ahead and swap a team in here that you think would trade up with the Cardinals at number 4.
My first ETR pod and Silva's already bullying me into a decision that I didn't agree upon. I'm assuming, though, it makes it easier for everyone.
Listen, if you don't want to make a trade, you don't have to make a trade. But we can allow one trade for the mock draft. How about that?
That's okay. I'm assuming you would want it to be the Vikings, though, because if Jaden Daniels is on the board, I think the Giants could also be in play. But the Vikings obviously have more firepower to move ahead than New York.
Okay, let's switch Minnesota and Arizona. So Minnesota's on the clock at 4. Arizona's on the pick at 11. That sound fair?
Works for me. And if that's the case, then we will take Jaden Daniels off the board. I ultimately believe, even if JJ McCarthy were the one that slips to 11 for the Vikings, I ultimately believe they leave this draft with a quarterback in the first round. So completely fine by me. Jaden Daniels is the pick.
Yeah, Evan, you had heard, I think, that Justin Jefferson behind closed doors was lobbying for Jaden Daniels. Did I get that right?
Yeah. And I think I think actually Scott has heard that as well. And Scott is down there, around LSU. So I think that's definitely, and also, you got the contract negotiations going on you could build a lot of goodwill, I think, with Justin Jefferson if they were to make that move for Jaden Daniels. I also think that the Raiders are kind of sneaky. Apparently Jaden Daniels would love to play with Antonio Pierce, his coach at Arizona State, but the Vikings have the firepower.
All right. 4 picks down, 4 quarterbacks down. Scott Smith is on the clock at number 5 overall for the Los Angeles Chargers.
Yeah, this is another spot that you could have kind of thought about trading down depending upon who falls and whatnot. But here, since the trade has already happened, Minnesota's moved up to get their quarterback. Look, there's a lot of talk that, the way that Harbaugh wants to rebuild this team through the trenches and whatnot. But with Marvin Harrison Jr. dropping to them, the connection there with his dad, I think they're going to be comfortable with adding a wide receiver, which is also a need here. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is the top player on many boards for some teams out there. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the pick here for the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, embarrassing pass catching depth chart right now for the Chargers on paper. Picking 6th for the New York Giants is Mr. Evan Silva. You are on the clock, sir.
The Giants are another team that, a candidate to move up for a quarterback, as Peter Schrager, who's pretty good at mocking. He had them trading up to number 4. But right here, all the quarterbacks are off the board. So we're going to go with Malik Neighbors. The Giants are just desperate for playmakers. They have a bunch of little like number 2, 3/4 receivers, a lot of slot. They like guys who can win in the slot. Malik Neighbors was like 50-50 perimeter and slot at LSU, but he's a true number 1, I think, whereas the rest of their guys are like little role players. Gives Daniel Jones the best chance to succeed, and I think that they could come back in an upcoming round and take one of the second-tier quarterbacks.
All right, Malik Neighbors to the New York Giants. Picking 7th, the Tennessee Titans. Ben Standig is on the clock for the Titans.
I didn't get the boring pick at 3. This one feels a little straightforward with Joe Alt, the tackle from Notre Dame, sitting there. I know we're not doing trades, of course. If I was Tennessee, unless I think Joe Alt is that much better than the other tackles on the board, I'd be talking to say the Jets or any of these teams who might want to jump ahead of the Bears for Roma Dunze, or possibly jump ahead of the Falcons for Dallas Turner. But for our purposes, Joe Alt, tackle Notre Dame, continues their rebuild on that offensive line that they started last year with Peter Skoronski and have continued into this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, embarrassing offensive line performance from the Titans last year. They need a ton of help there. Certainly, Joe Alt makes sense for the Titans at number 7. So it's getting interesting here as we go to pick number 8. The Atlanta Falcons are on the clock. John Daigle, go ahead.
Whenever you initially sent out the list of what picks we were, I opened it up and crossed my fingers. I was not either 2 or 8. And here we are, because I truly believe the Falcons have the first wild card spot of the draft. Most mock drafts have Dallas Turner as the consensus. Honestly, I'm not sure he's even the top edger on their board from everything we're hearing throughout the background. But there's also one steaming player in particular that I'm going to put here and to ease everyone else's mind trying to fit him in, because I do think Byron Murphy is very much in play to be a top 10 pick and the first defensive player off the board altogether. I'm going to sneak him in here, given that David Onyemata, yes, is on their interior line right now, but 31 years old. They can cut him next year and save $10 million against the cap. We know Raheem Morris just built a defensive unit, honestly, a respectable one, out of, like, on paper, not something that looked great. And he turned them into good around Aaron Donald. I think Byron Murphy can be that same build here. So that's who I like at number 8.
Absolutely. For anyone betting props, like the stuff where you differ from all the mocks. In other words, everybody had Dallas Turner going 8th. Where you differ is where you can get the longest shots. Odds to be the first defensive player off the board. Byron Murphy was plus 750 yesterday. I saw it get down to 4-1. Also, there was a ton of stuff. Most sites have odds to be the number 8 overall pick, odds to be the 9th overall pick, odds to be the 10th overall pick. And if you are against consensus there, which I think is a sharp spot by Daigle here to be started to be off the board at number 8, 9, 10, and get some long shots there for sure. I think some of that stuff is good. Okay. Byron Murphy, first defender off the board. We are now up to pick number 9. Scott Smith has the Bears again. He already picked for the Bears and, of course, took Caleb Williams at 1. Go ahead for the Bears at number 9, Scott.
Yeah, we've got 2 guys up in Chicago here, and I'm the one making the picks for the Bears. Some of the information that I've got, I think 2 players really come to mind here, and I'm going to go ahead and go with the first in Roma Dunze, wide receiver out of Washington. I think he's going to be the target for them, and if he's not there, I think they could go with Jared Verse, but here I think they go ahead and try to build around Caleb Williams, and I think he's going to be the pick there at 9 if available on Thursday night.
Man, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, DeAndre Swift, Cole Kmet. I mean, that's starting to sound really nice for the Bears if Roma Dunze does indeed slip to them at number 9. Number 10, interesting spot here for the New York Jets. Evan, number 10, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are a bunch of options here that I could envision. I think Brock Bowers has appeared in a lot of mock drafts, going to the Jets at 10. Dallas Turner, I think, would be a great addition for them off the edge. They did trade for Hassan Reddick, but they lost Bryce Huff in free agency. I think that they could go with Latu as well. I think Troy Fatanu, who I had in my second mock draft, is also a potential option here. So I'm going to go with Brock Bowers. Daniel Jeremiah was recently asked, and he's good buddies with Joe Douglas, the Jets GM, was recently asked during I think it was on a conference call. Yeah, a conference call Q&A with beat reporters. Who does he think the Jets would go with at 10? And he went with Brock Bowers. So I'm going to follow suit. And I mean, you look at this receiver core, it looks pretty good on paper. The Jets, Garrett Wilson's going to be a stud. Mike Williams, but he's got major injury concerns, only on a 1-year deal. You got Alan Lazard down at the 4th receiver spot at this point. Actually, it doesn't look that good. I think they need to add Brock Bowers and play him as like a movable chess piece who gets a lot of time in the slot.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly the consensus right now is Brock Bowers to the Jets. I'm not so sure that's going to happen. That's certainly consensus right now. I've taken some long shots on stuff to go 10th, like Joe Alt 25-1 and some other long shots on guys to go 10th, but we shall see. I mean, Jets could also take an offensive tackle, man. I mean, Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, I highly doubt they hold up for the whole season physically. So, and you need to keep Aaron Rodgers upright, of course. So really interesting spot for the Jets. We'll see what they do. Evan went with Brock Bowers. 11th overall, the Arizona Cardinals are now on the clock after our trade between the Vikings and the Cardinals. So go ahead, Ben. You have the Cardinals making their first pick of the draft here at 11 overall.
So that means they've got 3 first-round picks now. And that's an interesting dynamic. I was even pondering, could you go crazy and go Brock Bowers if he was there just because you have those other 2 picks to fill in some needs? I could justify taking Fatanu to bulk the guard from Washington to bulk up their line. The pass rushers haven't gone off the board. Maybe if I want to get nuts, go for a corner here. But I think the corner I can wait on with one of their other picks. So for me, it's either taking the best guard on the board or the first edge rusher. I'm going to go with, since we've got a defensive-minded coach, give me the pass rusher, and I'll go with Dallas Turner here. We can debate whether, he or Latu or Verse is the best one, but in general, Turner has been viewed as the number 1 edge, so I'll go with Turner at number 11 for the Cardinals.
All right, Cardinals make their first of 3 first-round picks here. Dallas Turner to the Cardinals. 12th overall is the Denver Broncos, who actually made a big news right before we came on the air here today, acquiring Zach Wilson, the MILF Hunter himself, is now part of the Denver Broncos. Daigle, 12th overall, Broncos. Go ahead.
Maybe that eases their mind and doesn't get them to force either Bo Nix or Michael Penix into this card. There's a scenario too where guys I know they want, like a Jared Verse, Laiatu Latu, are gone before they pick. But right now with this board, I do think Latu is at the top. I think they'll prioritize an edge here over reaching for Nix or Penix. So I'm taking Latu off the board.
Their roster is so bad. They have to take the best available player. I think they have to take the best available player, and I think they will. Okay. Mr. Latu to the Broncos at 12 overall. Scott Smith is back on the clock at 13 overall, picking for the Las Vegas Raiders. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so there's a couple of trains of thought here with the Raiders, and you look at the roster, and you could easily make a case for both tackle and cornerback. They've been connected to a few of the players there, but the player that is getting the most steam of draft boards right now is Michael Penix, and there's some argument through a number of other teams whether or not the Raiders would make the pick here or whether they would trade back into the first round, but with some of the other teams being interested and some of the guys that are well connected within the industry, they're pointing towards the Raiders taking Michael Penix. So we're not going to worry about a trade down because we can't do it here, but I'm going to go with Michael Penix here to the Raiders.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much consensus that Michael Penix does not have a first-round grade by very many evaluators whatsoever. We've seen in the past that has not stopped the Raiders from taking guys high. So very, very controversial would be Penix at 13, I think, in a lot of the scouting and analytics community, but doesn't mean the Raiders won't do it. 14 overall, Mr. Silva is picking for the New Orleans Saints. Go ahead, Evan.
So I've been told just Saints are going to take the best available offensive tackle at number 14 flat out. They need to. Trevor Penning has been a big bust. Right now he would be slotted in to be their starting left tackle, and Ryan Ramczyk is slotted to be their starting right tackle. We don't even know if he's going to play football again in the NFL. So it comes down to Troy Fatanu, who it seems to me teams look at him more as a guard. So we're going to cancel him out. Then Olu Fashanu against J.C. Latham. I'm going to go with Olu Fashanu. The Saints value high-end athleticism across the board as much as most teams. And Olu Fashanu's got these little alligator hands, which kind of bothers me. But he's really athletic. He's got the ideal size dimensions. I think that they just plug him in at left tackle and hopefully try to get something out of Trevor Penning at a different position.
All right. Olu Fashanu to the Saints at 14 overall. 15 overall is the Indianapolis Colts. Ben Standig, you're on the clock for the Colts.
Yeah, so I'm definitely considering Brian Thomas here, but do we have, maybe you guys have already discussed this, but we were discussing before, is there an injury situation here we need to discuss or no?
sounds like, based on what Scott and Evan are hearing, there is a torn labrum issue, and this is starting to gain some steam publicly with Brian Thomas. I should note that torn labrums, I think, are pretty standard, and like teams mostly brush them off. So I don't know, Scott. What do you think? You think it's like moving Thomas down teams' boards, or not that big a deal?
So when I first heard about it, I checked here locally with some sources, and I was able to confirm it with 3 different sources. The labrum issue, from what I understand, can take about 8 to 10 weeks post-surgery to really get back rolling. But it's also something that I've actually torn my own, and I dealt with it for 1.5 years before I decided to get surgery. My reports is that he's been playing with it since the injury happened in the Alabama game, and that he could possibly make it through the season. Here locally this weekend, some people that I talked to said that the teams that they have heard are not necessarily scared off by him, but I do know on some teams that they do have a little bit of a red flag that could drop him. So I think he would make a lot of sense to Indianapolis, and he is specifically one of the teams, with Indianapolis that I've heard are not scared off by the injury.
There are also so many teams with first-round grades for him. It's hard to imagine he sneaks out, unlike other guys who are hearing about negative medicals like a Ladd McConkey, a Kool-Aid McKinstry. Maybe those guys were so fringe that, like Cyrus O'Torrence last year, they get pushed out for those medicals. But teams are all over Thomas just because he's obviously so explosive.
It's just concerning to me. Like, why has he not had the surgery yet? Why did he not deal with this and get this fixed? I mean, we're getting, late in the process at this point.
Yeah. For sure. All right. There's some context for you, Ben. The Colts, I assume, have already done all their homework on here. They're not listening to the EstablishTheRun.com podcast to get their information on Brian Thomas's labrum, I hope. But anyways, Ben, go ahead. Colts 15 over.
So, I do think the Colts need to get a more explosive weapon for Anthony Richardson in this offense. That said, since I'd like to see the x-rays myself. But since I don't have that option, and knowing every year that there are wide receivers available on day 2, I'm going to pass on the receiver and instead go cornerback. All the options are there. Chris Ballard, I think, is going to want the athletic guy. So give me Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback, Toledo, for the Colts at 15. They definitely need to get some help there.
Yeah. Ballard also not afraid to go with smaller school players. As long as they're big-time athletes. I really like this one.
I believe Quinyon Mitchell will be the first-round pick out of the MAC since Corey Davis. So shout out to Quinyon Mitchell. All right. 16 overall. Daigle is on the clock for the Seattle Seahawks.
J.C. Latham is a monster, but Seattle doesn't have a need there with Charles Cross and Abe Lucas still in their rookie deals. Where they really need help is on the interior. And although Graham Barton is an exciting player that teams are really happy to draft on the interior, Troy Fautanu just makes far too much sense for them, especially given the obvious connection with Ryan Grubbs at OC coaching Fautanu at Washington the past 2 years. So if he's still on the board, I think that's where they go at 16.
All right, Troy Fautanu to the Seattle Seahawks at 16. 17 overall, Jacksonville Jaguars. Scott Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, Jacksonville's another interesting team that I think could go in a couple of different directions. I think Brian Thomas could be a possibility here, but 2 players that I've heard linked to them that they're heavily interested in and also coincides with kind of their draft history is both of the cornerbacks from Alabama, and Tyrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry. I've heard Jacksonville likes them both, but in this situation, we're going to go with the higher player on the board, which is going to be Tyrion Arnold.
Tyrion Arnold to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Passing on wide receiver there are the Jaguars. Evan, 18th overall, the Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock.
Yeah, so the Bengals, I in my latest mock draft, I had him going A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas, with the T. Higgins situation still kind of unsettled, although I think that he's kind of come to terms with the fact that he's going to be a Bengal this year and then hit free agency next year. At least that's what he's indicated publicly. The Bengals are longtime fans of drafting big school players and really, just picking off the highest rated dude. And I think that's actually J.C. Latham. And I'm not really going to worry about his position right now. Trent Brown and Orlando Brown are penciled in as the starters for the Bengals at offensive tackle, but Trent Brown is really not reliable from a health standpoint, I don't think. And it's possible that Latham could begin his career at guard. So I think they just figure out the position later, and they go with a massive dude from a big school, very highly rated. I think that kind of suits the Bengals' MO.
All right, JC Latham to the Bengals at 18 overall. 19 overall is the Los Angeles Rams. Ben Standig is picking for the Rams.
So when Aaron Donald retired, everybody immediately put a defensive tackle in here. Obviously, Byron Murphy is long gone in this exercise. That led then to, okay, what about edge rushers? We've got 2 off the board, but Jared Verse is still here. I will say he's one of the players I'm most confused as to where I think he goes. If you told me he goes top 12, I could buy it. If you tell me he goes bottom 8 picks, I might be like, okay, that makes sense. This is sort of in the middle to a degree. So give me Jared Verse, edge rusher from Florida, to the Rams at 19.
Jared Verse slide ends at number 19 overall to the Los Angeles Rams. 20th overall, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Daigle is picking for them. Go ahead.
It's always fun to mock for the Steelers because there's one of those teams that always tip their picks. And as far as I'm hearing right now, it's between 2 guys, either tackle Amarius Mims or, if they prefer, an interior player like Graham Barton. And I believe it's going to be Barton, if only because they seem to have a lot more confidence in Dan Moore than anyone else I've talked to around the entire league. So they're going to address their interior, instead go Barton out of Duke.
Graham Barton to the Pittsburgh Steelers at 20th overall. 21st overall is the Miami Dolphins. Scott Smith is picking for the Dolphins.
Whew, the Dolphins have had quite the exodus here in the offseason, losing a lot of guys. And I think there's a lot of, makes a lot of sense to either go among the offensive line or the defensive line. Specifically, I think offensive line would help a lot. But when you start to look at the defensive line, in particular the injuries to Bradley Chubb, Phillips, and then also losing Christian Wilkins, I don't have a great key in on where Miami's going to go, but for those reasons and those losses and injuries, I'm going to go with Jerzon Newton out of Illinois to kind of fill that spot that they have with Christian Wilkins. I just think that defensive line needs a lot of help, and there's a lot of question marks going into this season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the cap isn't real, people. Don't look at what the Dolphins had to do. I mean, they lost so many guys due to cap constraints, did the Dolphins this offseason. 22nd overall is the Philadelphia Eagles, who just stumbled to the finish line last year. They're picking 22nd overall. Evan, go ahead.
Yeah, so Talise Fuaga is still out there.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, the Eagles are not afraid to draft players that might not start, especially on the offensive line and defensive line, really. Not afraid to draft players who might not start right away. Lane Johnson is getting up there in years. I think that if they were to play Talise Fuaga at guard, he could maybe beat out Tyler Steen at right guard. Howie loves the trenches. That's something, you can always bank on Howie using like an early round pick on an offensive lineman. He's had some misses, Andre Dillard, but he's had a ton of hits. And I think that Fuaga, who's drawn comparisons to Mike Iupati, I think they could play him at right guard in year one. He could start, and he could eventually take over at right tackle for Lane Johnson.
Yeah, I can hear the people in Philly now saying, we had the worst defense in the NFL over the last half of the season. We had to get a defensive player there, but certainly building through the trenches, offensive line is something the Eagles have done historically very, very well. All right. 23rd is another Arizona pick, Arizona's second pick. This is the one from Cleveland via Houston, the Deshaun Watson trade, and then the Texans trade back, so they had a round 2 pick for Diggs. Anyways, doesn't matter. Arizona does have the number 23 overall pick here. Ben Standig is on the clock.
Fortuitous that I get to pick them both. So I went with the edge rusher at 11. And obviously, if the Cardinals stay put at 4, we're all going to assume they're taking Marvin Harrison or one of the receivers. Well, Brian Thomas is still sitting here on the board and gotten the clearance from the medical staff that he's good to go. And, it basically, it feels like it's Brian Thomas or you're dropping a tier. So to fill in that gap that we didn't take at 4, we'll go here with Brian Thomas, wide receiver, LSU.
Yeah, and that's the thing about this wide receiver class. Guys can slip because they're like, oh, well, there's 10 other guys that I like. They're going to go late round 1, round 2, early round 3. Might as well just wait. So, I think there's their wide receivers could slip more than people think, but it's not because they're not good players. It's just there's just so many of them. Anyways, 23 overall, Brian Thomas to the Cardinals. 24 overall is John Daigle, who is a native Texan. Of course, he is picking for the Dallas Cowboys at 24th overall.
But calling me a Cowboys fan is similar to calling Silva a Bears fan. We will get very upset about it. Having said that, we know that public mocks have the Cowboys drafting offensive tackle. Very well could happen just to try and move Tyler Smith around. If not, maybe go interior, keep Smith then on left tackle rather than keeping him on the inside. I'm going to go off the board here because I do think there are 2 wild card spots for the Cowboys who Mike McCarthy, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks all in the final year of their contracts, probably bringing a few of those guys back. But I think Texas A&M linebacker Edgerrin Cooper and Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy are both very much in play for Dallas, and then just ignoring and piecing together offensive line through the rest of the draft. So I'm going to take Worthy off the board here, stick him to the Cowboys who have a need, and then also he's one of those guys I always try to jam in the first round because I truly believe he's going somewhere on night 1. So I'm just going to put him right here for us.
All right. The record-setting speedster Xavier Worthy to the Cowboys, who, of course, very cap-strapped and still have to pay their 3 stars, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, Dak Prescott did not make any moves in free agency of note. So, yes, Xavier Worthy, 24 overall to the Cowboys. 25th overall is the Green Bay Packers. Scott Smith, you are on the clock.
So there's a couple of different directions with Green Bay, but specifically when you start to look at the type of players that they draft, they like guys with a high rise. And, I look at the lineup and, losing Bakhtiari at tackle, not that he's been able to play much lately with injuries. I think offensive tackle is a primary need and it's going to be a priority in the draft. Here we have Amarius Mims out of Georgia, who a lot of teams are kind of split on because he's a young guy who's only got, 8 college starts, I think, to his name. But, he's a guy, when you look at the film and look at the length, a lot of scouts and a lot of front office people are very impressed with him. And I think in this circumstance, I think Green Bay would be happy to get him with him dropping here.
All right, Amarius Mims to an exciting Green Bay Packers offense. 26th overall is the Tampa Bay Bucks. Evan will be picking for the Bucks here. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the Bucks could use a lot of help on up front on defense and in the back end on defense. And so I'm looking at Cooper DeJean. I'm looking at Chop Robinson. And I'm looking at Kool-Aid McKinstry. And apparently everyone at the combine was saying that on the field was saying that they think that Cooper DeJean is a safety, and the Bucks have like the best safety duo in the league. This is a tough one. I think that the public is not as high as teams are on Chop Robinson, and the Bucks could use a lot more juice off the edge. So I'm going to go with Chop Robinson here. Big time athlete, outside pass rusher out of Penn State.
Indeed. Shout out Penn State. Chopper Robinson to the Bucks at 26th overall. Somehow, Ben Standig is making the 3rd pick for the Arizona Cardinals of the first round. This is 27 overall. Absolute haul for the Cardinals here if this is the way it goes down. Ben, go ahead. 27 Cardinals.
Yeah, pretty fascinating. I'm glad Evan took Chop Robinson because since I took an edge for the Cardinals earlier, I would have been bummed if he was sitting there because I wouldn't want to necessarily take another one. I don't know. From a purely just positional value, the fact that Tyler Guyton is still sitting here is interesting, but I'm thinking cornerback / defensive back. And while McKinstry and Nate Wiggins are there, it's getting hard for me to say I'm going to let Cooper DeJean get by. whether he's corner or safety in the Cardinals, he's a playmaker. They need more of those. So give me Cooper DeJean, defensive back from Iowa, to the Cardinals at 27.
He of the absolute ridiculous high school basketball highlights. Cooper DeJean to the Cardinals at 27 overall. All right. The Buffalo Bills lost Steph Diggs, lost Gabe Davis. John Daigle is on the clock for the Buffalo Bills right now.
Very confident they're taking a wide receiver. So I just usually in my mock stick them with whomever's left over. I don't think, though, that they necessarily are looking for that alpha to replace Stephon Diggs. I think they're looking for someone who more can mesh with Joe Brady and get yards after the catch. The only thing is, I don't know what they think about Ladd McConkey's medicals. And so I'm going to stick them with A.D. Mitchell out of Texas instead. Mitchell's someone who, in Bob McGinn's terrific piece, as usual, at Go Long right now, he talked to some GMs who apparently took Mitchell off their board entirely for character concerns, but I'm hoping the Bills aren't one of those teams. I still think Mitchell's a first-round player.
A.D. Mitchell, 28 overall to the Buffalo Bills. That is the fifth wide receiver off the board here as we move to 29 overall. The Detroit Lions are on the clock. Scott Smith will be picking for Detroit.
Yeah, it's just a situation where we have a player in Kool-Aid McKinstry that is sliding here. I think he makes a lot of sense. He could play opposite of Carlton Davis, who the Detroit brought in during the offseason. And McKinstry's a guy that, prior to the injury that was found at the combine, a lot of people thought he had a chance to possibly be the first cornerback off the board. He's excellent in press coverage, and I think when you start looking at the Detroit Lions and how they draft and how they want to build their defense, I think he's a guy that would make a lot of sense to them there for Detroit.
All right, Kool-Aid McKinstry to the Detroit Lions at 29 overall. 30th overall is the Baltimore Ravens. Evan Silva is picking for the Ravens.
So the Ravens lost a lot of dudes on the offensive line this offseason. John Simpson to the Jets, Kevin Zeitler to the Lions, Morgan Moses went to the Jets as well. And I'm looking at, in my latest mock, I had Jackson Powers Johnson going to the Ravens at 30, but Graham Barton was not available because he had gone much earlier. I think that Graham Barton is a plug-and-play left guard starting right away for the Ravens.
We have our first duplicate pick. Graham Barton went to the Pittsburgh Steelers at 20th overall,
All right.
selected by Mr. John Daigle. Strike it from the record. Go ahead, Evan.
Well, we tried. We tried to get our guy, and they said no. The division rivals took him. So we're going to go back to Jackson Powers Johnson, who I think is an environmental fit in Baltimore, and we again plug and play left guard.
All right, Jackson Powers Johnson to the Baltimore Ravens at 30th overall. 2 picks left here. San Francisco, 31st overall. Ben Standig will be picking for the 49ers.
So certainly a bunch of different options here, corner, receiver. Just to make sure I don't pull a Silva, Tyler Guyton is still on the board, right? All right. So in my head, I usually assume that Guyton is gone, and I'm looking at Jordan Morgan out of Arizona, and whether in this case, whether he's a guard or a tackle, I don't think matters as much to the 49ers. But that said, the upside of Guyton, I know there's a little bit of concern there. He's the one guy I can see slipping a bit to the end of the first round among those tackles. But when you consider, the size, the potential, he, can play right tackle. It's where he was playing in college. And maybe if you develop him, he's the eventual replacement for Trent Williams on the left side. So give me Tyler Guyton, tackle Oklahoma to the 49ers at 31.
All right. Tyler Guyton, 31st overall, sneaks into the back of the first round. Last pick of the first round is held by the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I do want to preface this by saying there was an article this morning from Adam Schefter which said Rashee Rice is expected to be suspended for multiple games. There wasn't much more detail in there. We don't know if it's multiple games this year, multiple games next year. I think the process is going to play out, but the expectation is at least at some point, Rashee Rice is going to get a suspension for the driving incident that happened a few weeks ago. So with that, Daigle, 32nd overall, you're on the clock with the Chiefs.
And they did draft Mecole Hardman whenever they thought Tyreek Hill would be facing suspension. That, though, came in an entirely different night, not round one. I still think tackle will be the priority here. We have a couple guys left over on the board that are fringe round one individuals, Jordan Morgan, for example. But the name that keeps popping up whenever you talk about the Chiefs in the last pick of round one is BYU tackle Kingsley Suamataia. So that is the direction I'm going to go. I think I pronounced it correctly. Suamataia, maybe something
Close.
like that. Either way, yeah, that's where I'm going, Scott. Correct me, and then that is round one.
Beautiful. Yeah. Everybody assumes that the Chiefs are going to take a wide receiver. I don't think that's a slam dunk at all. No. Like they could take cornerback.
I think they could also take a corner. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they could go cornerback. They could go.
I mean, they
offensive.
actually lost L'Jarius Sneed. They haven't officially lost Rashee Rice.
Yep. Exactly. All right. This was a lot of fun. We broke the rules. We did do one trade, but otherwise we abided by the Honorable Roger Goodell's request. And yes, the annual Established to Run mock draft is indeed in the books. If anybody's just listening to this on the iTunes feed, highly recommend you go to our YouTube and check it out. There you get to see not only our disgusting faces, but you do get to see all the beautiful graphics and board that producer Ryan puts together. Before we get out of here, Scott Smith, tell the people where they can find you, where they can find your work, and how they can find you on the social machine.
I am posted up at 4for4.com doing some MMA write-ups for a betting market as well. But for the next 3 days, that's where I'll be over on the Move the Line podcast, where with a couple of our guys over there, Connor Allen, Ryan Newton, and Vegas Refund. And so I'll be there along with a couple other guest spots here on radio and some other podcasts. But I'm looking to compete with these guys this year and maybe get lucky and get a win.
All right. Scott Smith FF, I believe, is the Twitter handle, if I'm not mistaken. Be sure you're following Scott. Ben, tell the people where they can find you on social and where they can find your work.
Well, after this draft cycle, you can find me at the nearest bar, I think once we get past Saturday. But otherwise, you can find my work on The Athletic. You can find me on Twitter or X at Ben Standig, and my podcast, Standig Room Only, wherever you do your podcasting.
All right. Be sure to check out all of Ben's work. I remain a steadfast subscriber to The Athletic. Read it every single morning. Of course, you can find Mr. Daigle on Established to Run, but Daigle, tell the people where they can find you on the social machine.
They can find me at NotJDaigle on Twitter, at our company, and stay tuned because after the draft, we have some very big things coming.
Yes, very exciting. Of course, I am at Adam Levitan, all one word, at Evan Silva, all one word on the Twitter machine. Evan's mock 2.0 is up right now. Daigle's mock 1.0 is up right now as well. And also coming tomorrow, another draft prop show. And then Friday, be sure you're on YouTube live because myself, Evan, and a carousel of guests will be talking about reactions to round one and previewing round two. Stay tuned for that Friday midday. For Evan, for Daigle, for Ben, for Scott, appreciate everyone's time. As always, a ton of fun. I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.